Hello, my name is Joshua Mugabi. I welcome you to Carbohydrates and Lipids. Our lesson objectives this topic are carbohydrate structure, types of carbohydrates, triglyceride structure, types of fatty acids, carbohydrates versus lipids, lipid health risks, and body mass index. You are welcome. Carbohydrates. Carbohydrates function primarily as short-term energy source. The carbohydrates primarily function as short-term energy source. And their formula is CH2 or in bracket N. Monosaccharides join together via condensation. Monosaccharides join together via condensation reaction to form a more complex carbohydrate, such as disaccharides and polysaccharides. So we are looking at the carbohydrates, and we are saying that the smallest units are the monosaccharides. Now the monosaccharides, these join together via condensation reactions and they end up forming complex carbohydrates such as disaccharides and polysaccharides. Now if we look down here on our diagram below, you can see that here we have our glucose molecule and it is a monosaccharide. So a monosaccharide, and this one is also another glucose molecule which is also a monosaccharide. So what happens is that they are going to join together via condensation reaction. Now what we call a condensation reaction, it's whereby this hydroxyl molecule here is going to react with this hydroxyl molecule here, and then they will release a water molecule. And when they release a water molecule, then they will form a bond between the two monosaccharides. Now, we shall form a new product, which is a disaccharide. Now, the disaccharide that we have formed here, you can see that now they have formed a bond here. But again, they have lost a water molecule. So we lose a water molecule and then we form a bond. In the reaction where we are losing a water molecule and forming a bond is the one that we call the condensation reaction. That one is the one we refer to as the condensation reaction. The reaction takes place, there is loss of water molecule in that reaction. Now, when monosaccharide and a monosaccharide react, they form what we call a disaccharide. They will form what we call a disaccharide. So this one here we have is a disaccharide which we have formed. Polysaccharides of glucose. We have cellulose. Now cellulose is a structural polysaccharide in plant cells. Cellulose is the one that forms the structure of the cell wall. And cellulose is composed of a beta glucose subunit, and it forms a linear arrangement. So here, what we have here, we have a beta glucose. This one is a beta glucose molecule. And then down here, we have, this is a beta glucose. The other one up is an alpha glucose. And how do we know that this glucose is an alpha glucose or it is a beta glucose? You look at carbon atom number 1. Carbon atom number 1 is here. That carbon atom number 1, if you look at the hydroxyl is facing downwards. Then that one, you know that it is an alpha glucose. For the beta glucose, at carbon atom number 1 here, you will see that the hydroxyl is facing upward. Then that one, you'll know that that one is a beta glucose molecule. So cellulose, our cellulose is made up of a beta glucose unit. So it is a polysaccharide. And when we say that it is a polysaccharide, it means that it is made up of very many sugar molecules coming together. And we have two types of glucose molecules. We have the alpha glucose and the beta glucose. But cellulose is composed of beta glucose. Now we have another polysaccharide of glucose is starch. Starch, we have two types of starch. The first one is amylose. The first type of starch is amylose, and it is composed of alpha glucose as a subunit, and it forms a linear structure. So starch, which is amylose, is composed of the alpha glucose, and this alpha glucose forms a linear structure. Then the second type of starch is the amylopectin. Amylopectin is also made up of alpha glucose, but now this one, for it forms branches. Now you can separate or identify amylose from amylopectin when you look at their structure. Amylose, its structure is linear. It has a linear structure, and then amylopectin has a branched structure. But both of them are made up of alpha glucose. We have another polysaccharide of glucose, and that one is glycogen. Now, glycogen is an energy storage polysaccharide, and it is found in humans. It is a polysaccharide of glucose. It stores energy in humans, and it is made up of glucose. And it is composed of alpha glucose subunits, but it has a branched orientation. So that is glycogen. Glycogen is a polysaccharide of glucose, and it is found in humans, and it is composed of alpha glucose molecule. But when you look at its structure, it has a branched orientation structure. Now we want to look at the different types of polysaccharide. We compare them, and then we try to look at each one of them. Now we shall first of all start with the cellulose. Cellulose, the source of cellulose is the plants. We can find it in plants. And starch, we have amylose, can be found in plants. And amylopectin can also be found in plants. Then glycogen, the source is animals. The subunits. Cellulose, subunit is beta glucose. And starch amylose, the subunit is alpha glucose. Amylopectin, the subunit is alpha glucose. Then glycogen, the subunit is still also alpha glucose. Now when it comes to branching, cellulose, it has no branching, but it has only a connection between carbon atom number 1 and carbon atom number 4. Then starch amylose, it has no branching. It has only one connection on carbon atom number 1 and carbon atom number 4. Amylopectin, amylopectin is branched. It has a connection at 1 carbon atom and 4 carbon atom. Then it can make branches on carbon atom 1 and carbon atom 6. Glycogen, glycogen also is branched. It has a connection on carbon atom 1 and 4, and it can form branches on carbon atom 1 and carbon atom 6. We look now at the structures. For cellulose, it forms a repeating flat sheet. When you look at it, it forms a repeating flat sheets. You will see the sheets lining up themselves and they are flat, moving along. So for it, it forms up flat sheets which are repeating and repeating and repeating. That is cellulose. Now when you go to amylose, amylose forms a spilo. You can see that it is forming a spilo. It goes on spilling around. So that is how we can identify amylose. It forms a helical structure. Then amylopectin, amylopectin is branched. For it, it goes on forming branches. It will form branches, sub-branches, little branches. So when you look at amylose and amylopectin, you can identify them according to their shapes. They have the same subunit, which is alpha glucose, but when you look at amylose, amylose for it forms a helical structure, and amylopectin for it forms a branched structure. Now when we go to glycogen, glycogen wants to a little bit, it resembles like amylopectin. It is also branched. It has very many branches. It forms very many branches. So those are the structures of the different polysaccharides of carbohydrates or different polysaccharides of glucose. You can identify them according to that table. Sources, their subunits, are they branched, and their shapes. Polysaccharide structure. We start with the cellulose. We have said that for it forms structures which are flat repeating structures. So let us try to look at it. So when you look at its structure, it forms flat repeating sheets. They are sheets which are repeating over each other. If you try to look at the 3D dimension, it has flat structures which are repeating and repeating and repeating. That is the structure of cellulose. Then we want to look now at amylose. Amylose is a polysaccharide of starch. And this one we have said it forms a helical cylinder, a structure which is linear. How does it look in 3D? When you look at 3D, you will see the structures which are round. For example, if you follow the red and the blue, you will see that they are just forming helical cylinders. they go on forming helical cylinder, and the structure is linear, straight, but they form helical structures. Then we go to amylopectin. Amylopectin is another type of starch, but for it forms the cylinder structures with a few branches. It has some few branches. So it is a cylinder, when you look at it, a cylinder structure, but it has got some branches. When you look at them, they are branches, and we say that those branches, they always form on carbon atom 1 and 6. But the cylindrical structure, carbon atom form all are connected to carbon atom 1 and carbon atom 4. So that is the structure of amylopectin. Now we look at the structure of glycogen. Glycogen still also has a cylindrical structure, but for it has now more branches. If you compare it with amylopectin, the starch, for it's still the same cylindrical structure, but the difference between polysaccharide glycogen and amylopectin is that for glycogen has more branches compared to amylopectin. So it is also having a cylindrical structure, but now it has more branches. So that's how we can differentiate it from the starch. It has many branches, but it's still a cylindrical structure like amylopectin. Now let's go to lipids. Let's look at the lipids. Lipids, these are a class of organic molecules that are insoluble in polar solvent, especially water. So those are our lipid. It is a class of organic molecules, but these organic molecules are insoluble in polar solvents. Polar solvents are those ones that have charges, partial positive and partial negative. Those are polar solvent, and one of them is water. But the lipids are non-polar. That's why they do not dissolve in polar solvents. They include the triglycerides, we have the phospholipids, the steroids, we have the wax, and then we have also the carotenoids. Those are the types of lipids. Lipids perform a variety of functions within the body. They perform a variety of functions within the body. So we want to look at those functions. What are those functions? And we are saying they are variety. We look at those functions. The first function is the storage of energy. They can be used as storage of energy. For example, the triglyceride. These ones can be used in the storage of energy. Secondly, they have a hormonal role. They have a hormonal role, and an example that we can give, which has a hormonal role, are the steroid hormones. Third, they are for insulation. For example, sphingolipids. Insulation, always you know that under the skin, they are always fats, and they are very good at insulating, preventing heat loss from the body. They are also for protection of internal cavities. Protection of internal cavities, for example, fats and wax. They have a protective characteristics or property. Even in the body, they always protect the internal organ from any mechanical injuries. Then there are also structural components. They are structural components of cells. They are structural components of cells, for example, phospholipids. Phospholipids, they are the ones that form the membranes. We know that most of the cell organelles, especially in eukaryotic cells, they are double membraned, or they are covered in membrane, mitochondria, chloroplast, and so on. They are have membrane and cell membrane structures. They are formed of phospholipids. So the lipids are a component of the cell. We want now to look at the triglyceride. A triglyceride, these are fats and oils and function primarily as long-term energy sources. Those are the triglyceride. They are fats and oil, and their main primary function, they perform an energy source function. So if you look at our structure here, down below, this is our glycell. This is a glycell, and the glycell connects with 3 fatty acids. It combines with 3 fatty acids, and then later on we get what we call a triglyceride. A triglyceride. And then, of course, in the process of joining or covalently bonding a glycell with the fatty acid, we end up losing water molecules. And we say that a reaction where we lose water molecules is called a condensation reaction. These water molecules are lost when we are forming the bonds between the fatty acid and the glycell. When we are forming these bonds, we form a water molecule so that we can form that bond. So that is how we form a water molecules. 3 water molecules are formed because 3 fatty acids are covalently bonded to 1 glycell, and then we end up getting the 3 water molecules, which we refer to as condensation reaction. So we were saying that triglycerides, these are formed via the condensation reaction. They are formed via the condensation between the glycell and the 3 fatty acid chains. Like the way I've said, that 1 glycell is going to combine with 3 fatty acid. And in the process of combining with the 3 fatty acid, we are going to end up losing 3 water molecules. How do they come about? When we form a bond between a glycell and a fatty acid, we lose a water molecule. Whenever a bond is formed here and here, a water molecule is lost. We lose a water molecule here. So 3 water molecules are lost, and we end up getting our 1 molecule of a triglyceride. We form 1 molecule of a triglyceride after losing 3 water molecules. Then we form the covalent bonds joining the 3 fatty acids to a 1 glycell. Energy storage. Carbohydrates and lipids both are used for energy storage. They are both used for energy storage, and with the key differences. They have some differences, but they are used for storage of energy. Now, lipids are more suitable. They are more suitable for long-term energy storage in humans. Those are the lipids compared to the carbohydrates. So the lipids and carbohydrates, they are all for energy storage. But the lipids, they are more suitable for long-term energy storage compared to the carbohydrates. Now we want to look at the carbohydrates and then also look at the lipids. We shall look at glycogen as a carbohydrate and then triglyceride as a lipid. We want to see the storage. In terms of storage, the carbohydrates, they are for short-term, and then lipids, they are for long-term storage. Now, osmotic effect. Now, these ones, the glycogen, they have more effect on the cell, whereas the lipids, they have less effect on the cell in terms of the osmotic effect. When it comes to digestion, these ones are readily digested. Those ones are the carbohydrates, and these ones are less easily digested, the lipids. When we look at the ATP yield, the carbohydrates, they have a lower yield of ATP, and the lipids have a higher yield of ATP, which is roughly doubling that one of the carbohydrates. When it comes to solubility, carbohydrates are water soluble, and then lipids are not soluble in water. So that is the difference between the two energy storage compound or molecules, carbohydrates and lipids. This one, carbohydrates for short-term storage, lipids for long-term storage. Carbohydrates, they are more effective in terms of osmotic effect to the cells compared to the lipids. And when it comes to digestion, carbohydrates are readily digested and the lipids are less easily digested. But when it comes to ATP yielding, lipids have a higher ATP yield compared to that one of the carbohydrate. And when it comes to solubility, carbohydrates are more soluble, or they are soluble, whereas the lipids are not soluble in water. Fatty acids. Now, the fatty acids are long carbon hydrocarbon chain that are found in certain types of lipids. For example, we have a triglyceride and phospholipids. Those are the fatty acids. The fatty acids can be saturated, they can be monosaturated, unsaturated, or polyunsaturated. Now, when we go to the saturated structures, for them, when you look at them, you have a carbon atom here, carbon atom here, carbon atom here, carbon atom. So at every corner, there is a carbon atom. Now, when you look at those corners where there are carbon atom, you will see that from one carbon atom to another, there is only one line joining. And if there is only one line joining, that means that that chain or hydrocarbon is saturated. That hydrocarbon is saturated. Now, when you look at others, you will see there is a carbon here, there is a carbon there, there is a carbon here, there is a carbon there, carbon, 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 carbon. And you will see that there are points where we have only one line joining the carbon. And then there are others where we have two lines joining the carbon. Now, where we have two lines joining carbons that are close to each other, then that one we say it is unsaturated. Now, because it has only one double bond here, we have only one double bond roughly here, therefore we shall call it is monounsaturated. Monounsaturated. It has a bond which is not saturated. Now, when we go to the second one, we shall see here that we have two unsaturated bonds. There is this bond here, which is unsaturated, and there is another bond here, which is unsaturated. Therefore, we call it polyunsaturated. So those are the triglyceride or the fatty acids. They can be saturated, that is when they don't have any double bond between their carbon atoms, and they can be monosaturated if they have one double bond in the chain, or they can be polyunsaturated when they have more than one double bonds in the chain. They become polyunsaturated. When they have one double bond, they become monounsaturated. If they don't have any double bond, then we call them saturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids. The saturated fatty acid do not possess a double bond. Do not possess a double bond. Those are our saturated fatty acid. They don't have a double bond. They are linear in structure, just linear, and often solid at room temperature. They are solids at room temperature. Those are the saturated fatty acids. The unsaturated fatty acids. Unsaturated fatty acid, they possess a double bond. So where we have a double bond, the monounsaturated and the polyunsaturated, all of them we refer to them as unsaturated fatty acid because they have got the double bonds. They have the double bonds. They have double bonds. Therefore, we refer to them as a unsaturated fatty acids. The structure may be bent or liquid, that is at room temperature. So these ones, the monosaturated and unsaturated and polyunsaturated, their structure is bent and they can be liquid at room temperature. Mono means a single double bond, and then poly means multiple double bonds. Structural isomers. Structural isomers. Let's look at the structural isomers. So, unsaturated fats acid may adopt one of two isomeric forms, that is cis and trans. So we remember we said that unsaturated fatty acids are the ones that have got a double bond, but they are saying these ones can form two isomeric forms. There is a cis and a trans. Now I want us to see where the cis is. If you look at the cis, we have a double bond here. And if we have a double bond there, then here we have a carbon atom and a carbon atom here. So if both the carbon atom are on the same side, then that one is what we are referring to as the cis. Now when you go to the trans, we have a hydrogen here and hydrogen down here. So if you look at them, you will see that the hydrogen are on opposite sides. And here in the middle, we have a double bond. So when we have a double bond, and then we have the carbon atom next with the double bond, having hydrogen facing in opposite direction, that type of isomer is what we are calling the trans isomer. And if we have the carbon atom with the double bond having hydrogen atoms and those hydrogen atoms facing on the same side, that one is called a cis. It is called a cis isomerism. So they say these distinct structure configuration have different chemical properties. They are just isomers, different arrangement of hydrogen near the double bond, but they bring about a difference in the chemical properties of those molecules, though they are just isomers. When you look at the structure of the cis and the trans, They are different structure, but they are the same molecules. Only the arrangement of the hydrogen atom on the carbon atoms next to the double bond is the one which is different, so giving them different chemical properties. Let's now look at the difference between these two isomers, the cis isomer and the trans isomer. Cis isomer, the hydrogen atom are on the same side. The hydrogen atoms are on the same side. That one is this one here, and that one. They are on the same side. Whereas on the trans isomer, the hydrogen atoms are on different sides. We are talking about the hydrogen atom next to the double bond. This one and this one are on different sides. So that makes it to be a trans, and the other one becomes the cis. The double bond creates a kink, that is for cis. It creates a kink. A kink is like a bend. So when you look here, there is this bend that you are seeing. It's what we are calling a kink. It forms a kink. That one is what we are referring to as a kink, that structure, the way the structure is arranged. But when you look at the trans isomer, there is no kink in the chain. So the chain goes the way it is supposed to be, no kink at all. The cis isomer are loosely packaged liquids. These are loosely packaged liquids. Those are the cis isomer. And then the trans, these ones are tightly packed solids. These ones are tightly packed and they are solids. So the trans, they are solids, and the cis, they are liquids. Cis isomers occur commonly in nature. Cis isomers occur commonly in nature, whereas the trans isomer, they occur in processed foods. Trans isomers, they occur in processed foods. Generally, the cis isomers, they are good for health. They are good for health, and trans isomers are bad for health. So those are the differences between the cis and the trans. Cis, hydrogen on the same side, they form a kink next to the double bond. They are loosely packed, therefore they are liquid. They occur in nature and they are good for health. Trans isomer, atoms are on hydrogen atoms on different side, no kink, tightly packed, therefore they are solids and are found in processed foods, and they are bad for health. Lipid transport. Lipids, we say that they are insoluble in water, and for that reason they need to be complexed with the proteins in order to be transported in blood. So the lipids, we say, they are insoluble in water. So meaning that their transportation in blood becomes a little bit hectic. So for them to be transported in blood, they have to be complexed with the proteins so that it eases their transportation in blood. Now, what happens is that the lipid globules, these ones are going to be broken down by the digestive system. So we are here in the digestive system. In our digestive system, we have the lipid globules. They are going to be broken down into tiny particles, which we are referring to as the lipid globules. So when now they will enter into the villi. They will enter into the villi. So the components, when they enter into the villi and they enter into the intestine wall, they are going to be combined with the proteins. And when they are combined with the protein, they will form a chylomicron. And this one is via the Golgi complex in the intestinal cells. So from this side, they have been in the lumen. The other side here up, they are in the lumen of the intestines. Now when they enter into the intestinal cells, now in the intestinal cell, that is when they combine with the protein to form chylomicron, and then they will be connected to the Golgi body. And after connected to the Golgi body, they will now be combined to form chylomicron, and the chylomicron now will transport them and take them the other side to the lacteal to be transported. So the chylomicron are released from the intestinal cells. They are going to be released from the intestinal cell. Here, these are our chylomicrons. They are going to be released from the intestinal cells, and then they will be taken into the lacteal. They will be taken into the lacteal here, inside the lacteal, where they will be transported to the liver. So you can see that when we are starting from up here in the lumen, it is the lipids which are emulsified, broken down into tiny globules. Then these tiny globules will enter into the intestinal cells. Inside the intestinal cells, they will be converted into chylomicron in the Golgi body. The Golgi body is this one. The Golgi body now will mix them with the proteins, and then they will form what we are calling the chylomicron. The chylomicron now will help them to be transported up to the time when they go to the lacteal. In the lacteal now, that's where they are going to be transported and taken to the liver. The liver will convert the chylomicrons into soluble lipoproteins. So when they reach the liver, they are going to be converted, the chylomicron are going to be converted into soluble lipoproteins. Now, what is the function of the lipoproteins? The lipoproteins, their main function is to transport the lipids in the blood and hence regulate cholesterol level. So the lipoprotein, which is made in the liver, is a combination of lipids and proteins. And its main work is to transport the lipids in the blood so that they do not increase the level of cholesterol in the blood. We shall see that high cholesterol levels in the blood are an indicator of coronary heart diseases. So this cholesterol level, if they increase in the blood, they are going to result causing coronary heart disease. And for that reason, that's why the lipids are not transported directly in the blood. They have first of all to be joined with the protein so that they can easily be transported in the blood without increasing the level of cholesterol in the blood vessels. Now let us look at low density lipoproteins and high density lipoproteins. What happens when we have low density lipoproteins and when we have high density lipoprotein? Low density lipoprotein means that most of the fats are moving as fats in blood. Very few of them were converted into lipoproteins. And high density lipoprotein means that much of the lipids were converted into lipoproteins and very little amount of fats are just moving freely. So if we have low DL and HDL, what is going to happen? Now, low DL, that is low density lipoprotein, carries cholesterol from the liver. It carries cholesterol from the liver to the body for use by the cell. This one is carrying cholesterol. Whereas high density lipoprotein, this one carries excess cholesterol back to the liver. High density lipoprotein will carry the excess cholesterol back to the liver for disposal. It is carried back to the liver. It is not allowed to accumulate in the blood vessels. But when you have low density lipoproteins, it is going to facilitate the carrying of cholesterol and then taking it to the cells. Low density lipoprotein raises the blood cholesterol. It raises the blood cholesterol levels. Whereas high density lipoprotein, this lowers the blood cholesterol levels. It lowers the blood cholesterol levels. This one increases the coronary heart disease. That is low density lipoprotein. It increases the risk of coronary heart disease. Whereas high density lipoprotein reduces the risk of coronary heart disease. It reduces the risks of coronary heart disease. Coronary heart disease. Let's look at the coronary heart disease. High blood cholesterol levels lead to the hardening. They lead to the hardening and narrowing of arteries. So when we have high blood cholesterol in the blood vessels, what is going to happen? If you look, this is a normal blood vessel. If you look at this normal blood vessel, it has a large lumen where blood is passing. It is very large and free. But when you look at this one here, this is already affected blood vessel. Part of it has been now deposited with the cholesterol. And when it is deposited with cholesterol, that means that now the lumen for carriage of blood has reduced. The size of the lumen which carries blood reduces. So what happens exactly? What happens is that when cholesterol is coming in the blood, it is going to be deposited on the sides of the wall. And if it is deposited on the sides of the wall, this one is going to cause what we call a plaque. A plaque will harden. And when it hardens, now it has reduced, it has narrowed the route which is supposed to be used by the blood. It has narrowed the route that is supposed to be used by the blood. So blood is just going to squeeze itself in this part here. It will be squeezing itself to pass into that small area. So that one is going to cause what we are calling the coronary heart disease. As a result, fatty deposits form what we call a plaque in the blood vessels, which we refer to as atherosclerosis. It's referred to as atherosclerosis. The one that we are seeing here, it is forming atherosclerosis. This one here, atherosclerosis. Now, if you look here, it is what is forming here. This plug which is forming here, it is what we are referring to as atherosclerosis. That deposit, that plaque, is now narrowing the vessel diameter. Coronary heart disease. Rupturing of the atherosclerotic plaque. This one can trigger blood clot formation, what we call thrombosis. So if this one is formed, that sclerotic plaque, if it is formed, and when it is ruptured or broken down, it is going to trigger blood clotting formation in the blood. So this plaque here if at all now it ruptures and breaks, it is going to cause the blood clotting inside the vessel, which we call thrombus. Clotting of blood in the coronary arteries, or what we are calling coronary thrombosis, will lead to a heart disease. Will lead to the heart disease. So this one here, what is happening? When it breaks, that plug, when it breaks, it is going to cause clotting in the coronary artery or the coronary vessels. And when there is clotting, that means that now blood cannot pass very well. And if blood is not passing very well in that particular area, then we are going to get what we are calling the heart disease. Sometimes what we call heart attack, because blood cannot move freely. Health risk of fatty acids. Certain fatty acids affect the level of blood cholesterol in different ways. Cis fats increases the high density lipoproteins, therefore lowering the blood cholesterol level. That is the cis fats, which are liquid at room temperature. The saturated fats increases the low density lipoproteins, raising the cholesterol level in the blood vessels. So, the saturated fats are going to increase the low density lipoproteins, raising the cholesterol level in the blood. The cis trans increases the level of high density lipoprotein, and this lowers the blood cholesterol levels. Trans fats, they raise the low density levels, and low density lipoproteins levels, these ones greatly raises the cholesterol level, greatly raises the cholesterol levels. Diet rich in cis fats lowers the risk of coronary heart diseases, whereas diet rich in saturated fats is going to, and trans fats will greatly increase the risk of coronary heart disease. So, meaning that the diet that we take should always contain the cis fats and should also not contain the saturated fats and the trans fats, because those ones, they increase the risks of coronary heart disease. But the cis fats, those ones lower the risks of coronary heart disease. Trans fats pose a great risk. They pose a great risk as they significantly raise blood cholesterol. Those are the trans fats. Trans fats pose a great risk as they significantly raise the blood cholesterol. Evidence of health risks. There are two main health claims made about lipids in the diet. Diet rich in cis fats, this one is going to reduce the risk of coronary heart disease. Diet rich in saturated fats and trans fats is going to increase the risk of coronary heart disease. There are many factors to consider when evaluating this claim. Health impacts on all dietary components must be assessed, especially the carbohydrates. 2. Genetic factors may play a significant role. Validity of health data is independent on the size of cohort and duration of the study. 4. Correlations do not always equate to the causation. Body mass index. Let's look now at body mass index. What is body mass index? Any dietary component may cause adverse health effects if taken in excess amount. It may end up causing obesity. Any dietary component may cause adverse health effects if taken in excess amount, and this one may lead to obesity. So we have weight, and then we have the height. So we want to see at your weight, which weight are you likely to become obese, depending on your height and your weight. So you can calculate the body mass index. The body mass index, BMI, identifies weight ranges either via nomogram or according to the formula. BMI is equal to mass in kilograms divided by height in meters squared. That is the body mass index. You get the mass of an individual, you get the height of an individual. So to get the body mass index, get the mass of an individual, divide it by the height of an individual squared. The height of an individual squared. That's how you get the body mass index. According to the body mass index, the value of 18.5 to 24.9 is a healthy weight. If your value you get after calculating the body mass index, that is mass of an individual divided by his height squared, and you get in between 18.5 to 24.9, that one is a healthy weight. Thank you very much for participating in carbohydrates and lipids. And today we have looked at the carbohydrates structure. We have looked at the types of carbohydrates. We have looked at the triglycerides. We have looked at the types of fatty acids. We have looked at the carbohydrates versus lipids. We have looked at lipid health risks and body mass index. Thank you very much for participating. And please don't forget to subscribe.